Good morning. We're here at our Legacy Garden and our first garden class of 2022. And we have Gabriele here and she's going to be talking to us about a tea garden. So thank you for joining and enjoy.
Thank you for that great introduction, Sonia. So I want to say just a little, very briefly, something about myself. I'm a UC Lake County Cooperative Extension Master Gardener volunteer. And what we do is, teach classes and things like that, answer help desk questions. We are required to show the university that we're actually doing some good. So surveys are the hot ticket these days, right? I know you're all tired of surveys, so am I, believe me. So instead of giving you my sign-in sheet, I didn't bother giving you my sign-in sheet because you already signed in the other one. But I have to tell you legally that your name and email address is going to be sent to the University of California, Davis, and within a time of 1 week to 3 months, I don't know when they're going to send it, they're going to send you a survey, ask you how you like this class. So if you give us a good review, we're going to be able to teach more classes. That's the bottom line, really. And your name and email address will not be sold, will not be used for marketing of any kind. This is just for the survey, just so you know, so don't be worried about it. So I'm not going to bother about that because Jamali already has you. If you do not want to participate in the survey, I cannot make you, obviously, right? You can simply say you don't want to participate and that's fine. So today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite things, growing herbs for tea. Of course, there's many other culinary uses, for some of the herbs I'm growing. But tea was probably one of the first uses of herbs I learned from my grandmother and mother, believe it or not. My herbal career started at 5 years old with my grandma and mother taking me out in the garden, in the woods also, and showing me the different herbs, what their names are and what their properties are and what you can do with it. And I grew up in a household where we drank herbal tea every day, believe it or not, when all the other kids I knew were drinking lemonade and soda, which I was very jealous of. I had to drink herbal tea, right? So when I was a little kid, I really hated that. I wanted to have soda just like all the other kids, right? Only when I grew up did I come to appreciate what I actually had as a child, which is an incredible gift, right? So I grew up in this herbalist environment and only got to appreciate it as a grown-up. But, that's how things go, right?
Right.
So I brought a whole bunch of herbs for you, which I encourage you, and you don't have to sit there during the entire class. You can walk around and sniff those herbs and feel those herbs, so you get to know them. I'm going to talk a little bit about all of them when we get into the individual herbs. But before we get into the gardening aspect of it, I want to actually talk a little bit about the use, how to actually make tea. Because, I took that for granted that everybody knows how to make herbal tea. But that's actually not the case, right? If you haven't grown up with that, that may not be a normal thing for you. So I want to talk a little bit about that before I get into the specific herbs. And I brought a bunch of props. I brought some herbal tea for you to sample.
Oh, nice.
With little sampling cups. You're welcome to sample that. And I have some more props here. Right. Just to show you what you need to make herbal tea, which is really not a lot. Wrong jar. You can get very fancy with herbal tea, and in our household, tea time at 3 o'clock in the afternoon was a daily ritual, and we got fancy about it. We had beautiful handcrafted earthenware teapots, and
nice.
It was like a little tea ceremony. But you don't need that to make herbal tea. The only thing you need is a pot to boil water, a receptacle, to put your tea material in. And there's many ways to do that. The very simplest way to make herbal tea is boil some water, put your herbal material in a mason jar because that can take boiling water without cracking, right? But it could be anything. The only thing you do not want to use is a material that chemically reacts. You don't want aluminum, or you don't want an earthenware that has been glazed with a glaze that contains lead or any other toxic things. So if you buy earthenware from a potter, which I used to do for my teas, make sure that they use a food-safe glaze for their pottery. Very important. But the safest way to do it is just a mason jar. And so you can put your herbal material, let's say I would make some peppermint tea. Okay. So if I just want 1 cup of peppermint tea, that's about as much peppermint I would use for 1 cup of peppermint tea. Now, people have very different preferences in how strong or how mild they like their teas, and there's no rule. You can make it as strong or as mild as you like, So for a cup, that would just be about that much. The easiest thing to do is, if you have a fresh peppermint plant and you leave the stalk on, you don't even need the strainer because you can fish the thing out by the stalk when you feel it has steeped enough. So nothing more needed than a jar, hot water, and your herb. Now, hot water, when people say hot water, one of my most frustrating experiences in America, which is not a land of tea drinkers, is go to a restaurant and order some hot tea. So they bring you this tray, and they bring you your cup with several tea bags to choose from, and then they bring you a little pot with lukewarm water. And you think, well, how the hell am I supposed to make tea with this lukewarm water here? In order for that lukewarm water to extract the properties out of whatever tea you use, it would need to sit in there for half an hour minimum. I don't have that much time. So if I want to extract the properties from an herb quickly, you need hot water. You want it to be almost boiling. That's the ideal thing to quickly extract for a cup of tea. If you have all day, you can simply put this in a jar, fill it up with cold water, put it in the sun, and leave it there for 8 hours. You'll eventually get tea. That's called sun tea.
Yeah, sun tea.
So it's also a way to do it if you have lots of time, right? But, in Germany where I grew up, there's rarely enough sun to make sun tea. So that's not something we typically practiced. We use boiling water. So simplest way to just put this in, pour boiling water over it, let it steep for anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes or longer if you like. Then you can take it out or not take it out and drink your tea. You can sweeten it with some honey, with maybe add some other herbs to it, add some lemon to it. Anyway, there's many combinations possible. Now, if you have an herb that's not neatly on a stalk where you can just pull it out of the jar, there's various ways to do this infusion with this is a very fine mesh that is actually a material that is completely non-reactive, even though it doesn't look like it. This looks like a cheapo thing, but this is 35 years old. I brought it from Germany, believe it or not, and I've used it ever since, and it still is intact. You can still buy it on Amazon. They still make those.
I have a teapot and it has one of those strainers in the middle of it.
Yeah, perfect. But I'm just saying, if you don't have the fancy equipment, if you have the fancy equipment, well, great. But if you don't have the fancy equipment, there's all kinds of ways to put your herb in there. Even like a thing that's almost like a sock with a rim, right? See that? You can hang that in there. It'll kind of fits on the jar, and then you take it out. This stuff will not grow bacteria, but this material obviously is cotton and can grow bacteria out. So all I do is once a week, I dip it in a little bath of hydrogen peroxide to disinfect it. So you can easily disinfect it either with boiling water or with hydrogen peroxide, and this is as simple as it gets, right? Now, the black tea drinkers have some other gadgets that I'm not very fond of. I'm going to show them to you just to show you why I don't like them. Okay, you know those things? That's called a tea egg, right? It's okay for black tea or that. Same thing basically. You put your material in there, it has little holes and infuses without the herbs. The reason why I don't like those is, number one, they're metal. I don't trust this type of metal. This looks like aluminum to me. That could I would never use that. Other than, you know, as a nice, cute looking prop, right? This at least is a better metal that looks like a non-reactive metal. The problem with that is it's so small that if you put some dry herbs in there, they don't have the space to unfold to soak up enough water because they're crammed in that little tiny container. That's why I don't like them. Now, if this would be like 3 times the size, it might be useful, but then it doesn't fill my pot. So these are cute, but not that good actually, you know? But I brought them just so you don't waste money on buying something like that. This is a better one. This is a stainless steel, kind of similar to my old one. This is a much newer one. You know, that actually fits in a mason jar. It came in a mason jar with a fitting mason jar lid. And I lost the other part of the lid. I don't know what happened. But I wanted to show you this can be bought in stores or online that will fit in a narrow mouth mason jar. And, or you can sew yourself a little cotton cloth bag. Now, it needs to be a material where you can pour boiling water over it without the material either, you know, disintegrating, melting, or giving off plasticizers. So you do not want to use any synthetic fabric if you do that. It needs to be cotton or linen. And you can put your, you know, and then homemade tea infuser. So, you know, these are all ways you can make tea. Now, what I've been talking about is basically an infusion, because we have 2 technical terms for tea, and mostly we're talking about infusions today. An infusion, you have the definition here, is when you have hot, almost boiling water poured over fresh or dry material. Now, you can already tell that in order to make tea, you don't need to dry the herbs. No need to dry the herbs if you're going to put them in water. You can use the fresh herb. Actually, it's better fresh herbs than dried herbs. But dried herbs are fine because you have to store them somehow, right? Either way.
Do you put them after they're boiled, or can you put them at the beginning so they boil together, the herbs?
That's what I'm going to talk about right now. Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
So the infusion, generally, with soft herbs like that, I bring water to an almost boil, and then either pour it over the herb or throw the herb in the pot where the water is, right? You don't want to actually vigorously boil it. Why? Because the soft herb, the aromatic soft herbs such as peppermint and most of these herbs, the things we like about these herbs are their aromatic oils. They come out of that material very quickly when you pour hot water over it, and they evaporate. So if the water is too hot, the stuff will evaporate before you can even put the lid on it, and you're actually losing a lot of the good ingredients that you want in that tea. So if it's just below boiling, you pour it over there. Imagine I'm pouring almost boiling water over here, and then I put a lid on. Why do I put the lid on? Because I want to keep those aromatic oils that are already starting to evaporate. I want them to condense under the lid and then fall back into my tea because I want to drink them.
So would you use a plastic lid, or would that have a reaction?
I prefer that to the metal lids.
To the metal.
The metal lids that come
lids.
with the canning jars, and I brought one. This is the lid that originally came with the canning jar, right? First of all, they are all coated with plastic that has questionable properties too, BPA containing, etc. Number 2, I find that even though they're coated with plastic and then the rubber on the end, the liquid will still touch the metal part and will usually start reacting right away with the metal part, and you have rust from the metal dripping into your tea. That's why I generally don't use the metal lids that come with it. I use plastic, and this plastic lid is a plastic lid from a mayonnaise jar that fits the canning jar. You can also buy these plastic lids for canning jars. They sell them at every store that sells canning supplies. They now also sell these white plastic lids that you can cover your jar after you've opened. But I usually find that most mayonnaise jars have lids that fit the canning jars, and I use those if they're plastic, right? If you need to use this, you can just leave it, don't leave it on there for a long time because it will react with the metal in the rim eventually. So then after I poured the water over it, for peppermint tea, most of these plants that we have here, after you pour the water over it, we let it infuse. That's the technical term. The colloquial term is steeping, right? We steep it. We steep it, and I like to steep mine for 5 to 10 minutes. But like I said, some people only like to steep it for a minute. They don't want it to taste so strong. Some people like to leave it in there for half an hour. You know, experiment what you like. The longer you leave the herb in, the more properties you extract from the herb, obviously. Now, there is a limit to how long you want to leave it in, because at room temperature in Lake County, if you leave that in for longer than an hour at room temperature, sometimes it can start composting in there, basically. You know? So you don't want to leave it in there forever, because microbes will start multiplying that you don't necessarily want.
What about sun tea?
Well, that's the problem with sun tea. Honestly, when we made our Master Gardener cookbook, we had a sun tea recipe in there, and the university took it out because of the potential microbial contamination of sun tea, and they didn't want to be liable for us promoting sun tea. So officially, I cannot tell you that it's a good idea to make sun tea, okay? You do whatever you want, but, you know, there is a potential of contamination, quite obviously. And honestly, to be on the practical side, I only make sun tea when they are herbs that I've grown myself. So number one, I know exactly that there is no dog poop on the herb, no other contamination. You know what I mean? Nobody has spit on it or no car exhaust. So I would only make sun tea from an herb that I grew myself, where I know exactly. Even then, I don't know. I have cats. I don't know what they do at night in the garden with my herbs. Probably nothing, but you never know, right? So making sun tea, you're taking a risk of microbial contamination. If you want to take that risk, that's fine. I'd rather not most of the time, honestly, because the sun tea is no better tasting than the tea I'm brewing. So why take that risk? Just so I can look fancy in a nice sun tea bottle. I mean, it's just a gimmick as far as I'm concerned. Now, if I ran out of gas or electricity, definitely I would make sun tea. But as long as I have a means to heat water, you know, there's no reason really. Which, I'm not trying to discourage you, but I'm saying we do not promote it. So that's basically an infusion. After a period of infusing, what we call steeping. And these infusions are generally used for all these types of herbs, you know, that are relatively soft. When an herb, such as thyme, has been through a Lake County summer, it will not look like that anymore. You know, the leaves will get rather leathery. And I brought a few herbs that I couldn't take the pot because it was too big. So I brought a little pouch. Things that are not necessarily a great idea to get all the goodness out in an infusion, like rosemary is a great example. See, even though this rosemary has not had a lot of summer sun, so in this case you could still make an infusion. It's still relatively soft after the winter. Now, after 2 months of triple-digit temperatures, this rosemary will be as hard as leather, you know. So you can still make an infusion, but you're not going to get all the active ingredients out in an infusion anymore, right? So when that's the case, you know, with something like that, or what else do I have here? I have some lavender. Lavender can get very hard after the summer. Here, take a little whiff and look at it. You can smell. Pass it around to smell and look at it. Here I have some Cleveland sage that's flowering right now. Oh yeah. But mostly it's when you have gathered some roots or some bark. See that kind of material? It's like dried rosemary leaves. Now this is a little old. This has been sitting in my garage for 2 years, so this is not really fresh, but there's juniper berries in here. There is orange peels. There is dried rosemary. There is fennel seeds and some other barks. I can't even remember what all I put in there. With that kind of thing, an infusion would not get the good ingredients we want out of it. You know, it's sort of like yogi tea, the original form, not in the tea bag like you buy it now, but the original form of yogi tea when it was just, you know, a bunch of dried herbs and roots and berries. So what you would do that, you would make a decoction. That's the way of making tea. Yeah, so pass it around. This is really old, so it's not intense smelling. I just wanted to show it to you for the consistency.
So
This
how
used
would
to
you
smell
make that?
really intense 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been stored too long, I forgot.
Still smells good.
Which one now? Oh, that's Cleveland sage.
Oh my god.
That flower, yeah.
Yeah.
That's an
Favorite by
amazing
far.
tea, amazing tea
Yeah,
herb.
my
Yeah.
favorite smell.
And it's
by
also
far.
a favorite bee herb. It's a great pollinator plant. So this is.
So do
a
you
good
have
thing to grow
some that I can grow here in the garden?
I don't have a pot of it because mine is that big, and so I
Yeah.
just brought a couple twigs.
Yeah.
And
Do
those
we
have the
cut
seeds
it
in
and
it?
make new ones from that?
Yeah, but I didn't have enough time when I heard about it. I didn't have enough time to make new ones from that, you know, because I didn't
No
know.
problem.
No problem.
Next time.
So
Yeah.
anyway, next time, yeah. But you can buy it at nurseries.
Okay. What is
Cleveland sage.
Cleveland?
Cleveland sage is actually a native sage here, believe it or not.
Oh.
Not necessarily everywhere in Lake County, but it used to be native here. So it's good for so many reasons. But anyway, back to decoction. So when you have a hard material where you have a feeling, you know, pouring hot water over it is not going to get the goodness out of it, then you want to make a decoction. And a decoction, ideally, you want to soak the material. If it's dry material, you want to soak it in water for like 6 hours to overnight before you even bring it to a boil. So what I do is I throw it in water overnight, and then in the morning I start bringing it to a boil. But you stop just before it vigorously boils. You want it to just come to a rolling, slightly rolling little, when
I have a
water the
question.
surface, yeah.
When you boil, like for the dry tea leaves and stuff, do you put it in one of those sacks and then just throw it in the water?
No, I'm talking about that right now, how
Okay.
you do that. Yeah. So we're not going to talk about black tea leaves now. So I'm not sure what tea leaves you were talking
No,
about.
just any kind of tea leaf.
Leaves,
the
yeah,
leaves,
tea leaves, tender leaves like that, you don't boil, period.
Okay.
You just pour hot water over it and let it steep or infuse.
It's just like the
Covered.
tea bags that we get like from the store.
The ones I
tea
just
bag, yeah.
showed you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, most people only know tea from a box
That's
like
what
that
that's
in a
it.
tea bag,
That's
right?
it, yeah.
Well, you don't need that.
Yeah.
Because this is like astronomically expensive for a tiny amount of herb. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it because it's convenient, but I rarely use it. I keep it for guests.
Yeah.
I don't want anything fresh out in the garden, you know?
So which kind do you start at night and let it?
So back to my decoction, okay? Making a decoction out of, you know, when I want to make tea with something like that, barks, berries, hard stuff, I soak like a couple tablespoons in a pot overnight in water. If it's really hot in your house, you want to soak it in the refrigerator so you don't have things growing in it while you soak it. But if it's not hot in your house, you can just leave it at room temperature. It's going to be heated up anyway. Then in the morning, you bring it to an almost boil. You want basically the surface of the water to move with slight little bubbles, but not vigorously boiling. And then you keep it at that, very slightly simmering. It's called simmering in kitchen terms, right? You keep it at that simmer temperature, depending on how hard the material is, anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. Yeah, usually around 10, 15 minutes, maybe a little longer, making sure that your water gets colored and you see that things are actually coming out of it, right? And then you can test it and see if it tastes good. And then after you've simmered it, you just strain it into a decoction. So we've simmered that for, you know, anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. Then we strain it through a strainer, and then you can discard the material either. Sometimes some materials are so good that you can simmer them twice and still get some good stuff out of it, you know? You'll see. Some things not, you discard them, but sometimes I use them twice and you can make tea twice out of it. If you use them twice, you need to store the moist herb material that has already been simmered in the refrigerator. Because anytime you add water to something, microbial growth can start, right? So if you decide to use your simmering herbs twice, store them in the refrigerator before you simmer them again. So that's the two ways to make tea. Now, of course, you can mix and match your herbs any way you like. If you have a specific herb that you want for a specific purpose, which, like I said, we're not going to go very much into medicinal things today because that's not within the scope of the Master Garden program. But what I like to do is, let's say I want an herb that calms me down, such as lemon balm. Okay, lemon balm is kind of a calming herb and people like to use it for that. If you smell it, this doesn't smell very much yet because it hasn't had enough sun. Most of these aromatic herbs only develop their characteristic smell, these volatile oils, after they've been in the sun for a while. So when they come straight out of a greenhouse or out of a protected shady location where you've propagated them, they don't have a lot of smell yet. And if they don't have a lot of smell, you can tell they don't have a lot of the active ingredients you want, because that's what the smell tells you. The potent smell of an herb tells you there's a lot of active ingredient in it. If it has no smell, there's not a lot of active ingredient in it because it hasn't had a lot of sun. Now, the other thing about this particular herb, lemon balm, is when it's at the height of its growth, it smells super lemony. The smell is wonderful. But then you make some tea with it and you're kind of disappointed because you notice that it doesn't taste as good as it smells. And that is the case with a lot of herbs. You smell them and you expect a certain taste. Then you make your tea and you realize they actually don't taste like they smell. Bummer, right? So what do you do? What I do is I brew the herb for its calming effect, but I'm not too fond of the smell, of the taste, because the taste is not as lemony as the smell. So what do? Very simple. I pick a lemon from my lemon tree and I put some lemon juice in my tea. And then it tastes almost exactly as it smells. So what I'm saying is, if you drink an herbal tea for a specific benefit, but you don't like the taste, feel free to doctor the taste with something you like. And one of the main things I doctor the taste of my herbal teas with is just lemon juice or the lemon zest. The peel gives a very good taste if you have an organic lemon.
And
And one of my other
don't put sugar in it.
Yeah, well, sugar seems to improve the taste for a lot of people because they like a sweet taste. But you can use honey or you can use stevia. Stevia is an herb that's actually a sweetener. We grow it, to sweeten things. And all I'd have to do is brew a little sprig of that stevia together with my peppermint here. And then I would have sweetened peppermint tea. That is the healthiest and easiest way to do it. No sugar, still nice and sweet, right? Another way that I personally like to doctor the taste of teas that don't taste that great by themselves is an herb that is not easy to grow, almost impossible to grow here. It's Hibiscus subdarifa, what you buy in the Mexican store as Jamaica. You know that stuff? Kind of lemony and colors everything red. And I put a little bit in the tea that I brought
Oh, that was good.
for color and to give it a little citrus
Yeah,
tang.
that's good.
So you can use any tea that you actually don't like the taste of that much, such as this is made with Cleveland sage. That's a Cleveland sage tea that I mixed with hibiscus just for taste. Because the Cleveland sage, or a lot of the sage, exactly that one. A lot of the sages by themselves have a very intense kind of medicinal taste. So in order to make that a little milder and more pleasant, all you have to do is mix half Cleveland sage tea and half hibiscus tea, and all of a sudden you have a great tasting tea that still has the benefits of the Cleveland
Where
sage.
do you get your hibiscus tea?
Every grocery store in Lake County almost carries that.
Yeah, they have some
Every
at that
Mexican
La
store
Fiesta
carries it in
market.
bulk.
Oh, okay.
It's called Jamaica in the Mexican stores. Every Mexican grocery store carries that. I order it actually online in a huge bag, but yeah, of course. You can buy it some. I order it from a organic supplier online in a big bag because I add it to so many teas that I buy it in a large amount. And I tried to grow it 2 years in a row, and the problem is that the plant doesn't start making flowers till November, and by that time it's already too cold. So I never managed to get a good bunch of flowers off of it. So the plant just started making flowers, then we have usually the first frost. So it's not a plant you can realistically grow in Lake County other than in a greenhouse, right? That's why I buy it, because you don't have to grow everything yourself. You could, if you had a greenhouse, grow this yourself too. So what I'm saying is with both infusions and when you make a decoction, let's say you make a decoction out of this tea, which would be a very strong, very, very strong tasting tea, you know, kind of a medicinal type of strong tasting tea. A lot of people don't like that. Well, then what you do is you make an infusion of some good mild tasting tea and mix it half and half with your decoction. And then you have a great tasting tea and you still get the benefits of that. You just have to drink maybe twice as much tea, but you will still end up getting the benefits of that. So don't feel that you need to drink herbs you don't care for the taste by themselves. Mix something in. You can even mix fruit juice in your herbal tea. When I was a kid, certain herbal teas I didn't like, my mom just mixed a little apple juice in it. Now I find that if you don't want the sugar from a fruit juice, this is almost like a fruit juice without sugar. You know, hibiscus tea is basically a fruit juice without sugar, as far as the taste goes. So you can make almost any herb tea taste palatable for kids if you mix some of that in. In Germany, we used to mix it with rosehip tea, but because rosehips are abundant there, you know what a rosehip is? It's the fruit of the rose. And in Germany, that's an abundant, popular children's tea. They also make jam out of it. And that tastes a little similar to hibiscus. So in all the kids' teas, they mix some rosehip in there to make it taste good, basically. But hibiscus is the best thing to get here. That works perfect, you know.
Can you
just for
tell
that.
us the cautions about essential oils? Some people like to put a drop of essential oils in their tea.
Right.
And then they get too much.
Essential oils are like a whole class by itself. Now, I don't want to really spend a lot of time on it. The main thing I want to say is I would never put an essential oil in my tea or use internally that's not organically grown where I know it's completely pure. 80% of the essential oils on the market are mixed with synthetics to stretch it, believe it or not. So you do not want to put things in your body if you don't know for sure this is an organic, clean product. So if you have a good source for organic, you know, is good essential oils, great. You can put a drop of lemon oil in water. If it's good lemon oil, is really delicious just by itself. Or you can add it to an herbal tea. But you better make sure this is a really good lemon oil, you know. And with lemon, it's not that dangerous because even the synthetic lemon oil, you know, it happens to be one of the tastes that even in synthetic form isn't really dangerous. But there's other essential oils where the synthetics can be really liver damaging if you have an oil that's not pure. So you could do more damage than good by trying to make it taste good. The other thing I want to say about essential oils, which some people have found out the hard way, is if you have a plastic cup and you put water in it and add a drop of essential oil, the essential oil will dissolve plastic. It will dissolve your cup and you have a plastic solution in your water. So do not use essential oils together with plastic ever. Okay?
Thank you.
So other than that, we're not going to go very much into that. I just wanted to give you that little bit of warning. And you can flavor a lot of teas that don't have a lot of taste, such as this, you know, lemon balm is not very intense tasting. I added to some peppermint. So you could make half peppermint, half lemon balm. And it just has the good taste of the peppermint and all the beneficial qualities of the lemon balm, right? Obviously, you can drink your tea hot, cold, lukewarm, any way you like, with ice cubes or, you know. And a lot of, when you talk about medicinal teas, a lot of them have to be drunk hot because of the properties working better when you drink them hot. But if you drink a tea just for fun or flavor, it does not matter how you drink it. You can drink it any temperature you want. So the things you need, like we said, I already showed you, super easy, right? Everything else is kind of fun on top, you know, fun to make it more fun for you, but not necessary, really. We talked about how to spiff up boring tasting. Now we're gonna go to the gardening part. Oh, harvesting and processing. I just want to quickly, well, after the gardening. Let's talk about the gardening part. Growing those herbs. Most garden herbs, with very few exceptions, like well-draining soil, ideally sandy loam. Now, sandy loam is only available in 2 places in Lake County: Scotts Valley along Scotts Creek, and then some parts of Upper Lake, you know, next to the creeks where the creek bed overflowed. There's ideal soil, sandy loam. Most other people in Lake County, like where I live, we don't have ideal soil for growing anything, really. I have hard clay with rocks in it, right? But interestingly enough, things like lavender and all the Mediterranean herbs survive just well in my horrible soil. Not a problem. Now, if you're talking more about the non-Mediterranean herbs, you know, those soft things that come from Europe, they have to have they like a little better soil than the native clay. I'm not saying that they couldn't grow in there, but if you can make it a little nicer for them, you can grow some better potting soil. And the best way to fertilize herbs is actually just to start out with a soil that has a good amount of compost in it. And most herbs don't need more fertilizer than just the compost. So like what you have in those beds here, that would be more than enough fertilizers to grow all your herbs. The compost content of the soil for growing herbs can be anywhere from 5% to 50%, not more than 50% compost. And again, compost is not a real technical term, because good compost can be as nutrient rich as fertilizer, whereas, you know, cheap compost can have almost no nutrients in it. So when I say compost, I'm talking about good compost, right? Compost made from Christmas trees and nothing else has, you know, not much nutritional benefit. So in that case, you may need an actual fertilizer. There is herbs that need very little nutrition and others that need more nutrition. I want to say most of these guys are sort of in a category that grow well with nothing but compost. That's really all they need. The only herbs that need a lot of fertilizer, especially nitrogen fertilizer, are the herbs where you harvest daily, where they have to produce a lot of new leafy material daily. And that's basil, the basils. I want to show you a basil I have here. The only basil I have here is holy basil, which is a great herbal tea. Don't know if you smell it. It has a very special smell, not like regular basil. But you can see the growth habit of the holy basil is just like regular basil, meaning it wants to make flowers. As soon as it gets like 5 inches high and it gets warm, it wants to make flowers. Here are the little flowers developing already. See that? So if I let these flowers grow, it's going to grow out these flowers and make seeds, and that will be the end of the plant. It'll die after making flowers. It will not get any bigger. So in order to keep that plant going all season long, I need to keep clipping out those flowers. And the easiest way to do it is just to pinch them out. Whenever you see a flower forming, like see those 2 flowers here, I pinch them out and I make some tea with it. Or put them in a salad or whatever you want to do in case of the other basils, right? And you need to, with basil, do that literally almost every other day during the hot season. If you let that flower grow, that basil will go into reproductive mode. Once it goes into reproductive mode, it makes no more new leaves. It will just want to make flowers. Basically the end stage of the plant before it dies. And we don't want that, because we want the leaves for tea, right? Do we have to switch to phone?
Oh, we're good. She's
recording. Okay. So with some plants, like basil is a typical plant that requires a lot of maintenance, obviously, clipping those flowers out every other day in the summer. And because you're constantly taking away material from this plant, you need to supply fertilizer, because it constantly needs to make a lot more material. So basil is a fertilizer hog. It needs a lot of fertilizer. So this is something that you want to grow in like half compost, half soil, you know? And once it's been in that half compost, half soil container and it has grown in there for 1 or 2 months, you need to either supply new compost or fertilizer in some other form. Now, if you have it in a pot that's completely full to the top, you can't really add new compost without putting it in a bigger pot. So if you don't want to put it in a bigger pot, you need to add another form of fertilizer. And that can be either compost tea, You know how to make compost tea? That would be a way without having to add more bulk. Or you can buy a good organic fertilizer and use it very diluted when you water. Make sure you don't overdo it. With herbs, I usually use half the recommended amount of the liquid fertilizer. Or what some people do, which I generally don't, but it's not a wrong thing to do. There is these granular, long time, slow release granular fertilizers, you know, that you just put in the pot and every time you water, they release a little bit of nutrients. That's something you can do. I don't like them that much because they're synthetic, but you can use them. The herbs that originate in Europe or Eurasia are generally not drought tolerant. Most of them are perennials, meaning where they come from, and some of them even in Lake County survive for several years outside. This is one of them that probably doesn't survive outside for you unless you live in Buckingham. But stevia for me has not survived the winter. Now also basil will not survive the winter. The mint and lemon balm generally survive the winter in Lake County. Here I have something else. Lemongrass generally does not survive the winter in Lake County. Sometimes it does, but generally not. This is
So do you put
Chiso.
them on your sunroom? Or?
Yeah, I generally start fresh every year. With things like lemongrass, I will just buy a new lemongrass. What you could do actually, you could take some of the big stalks, cut them down to just the bottom of the stalk, and keep them in a little glass with a little water at the bottom over winter. On your windowsill, I have so much stuff on my windowsill of things that I'm starting that I usually don't bother. So I just buy another one, you know, the next year. But you could keep a stalk in a glass of water over winter and then plant it again next spring. This is one that I start from seed every year. It's called Chiso. It's a Japanese herb that is actually mainly used to wrap sushi in. But I learned from an old Japanese guy whose garden I visited that this was a valuable medicinal plant that they used for respiratory complaints, lung and respiratory complaints, which it's not known for here, but I started growing it for that. You can still wrap your sushi in it and know that you're actually doing something good for your lungs when you're eating that, right? This also doesn't survive the winter, but it usually self-seeds and you'll have seedlings coming up near where you grew it. So I started, you know, every year from seed, and somebody's welcome to take that. And this, incidentally, is like basil. It wants to make flowers. It has a growth habit like basil. So you want to, once it gets to a certain size and you start it's going to make flowers, you have to pinch the flowers out so it keeps making leaves. It gets huge, just like basil.
What does it taste like?
Yeah, that was my
Well,
question.
it does not. That is one of those herbs that's really an acquired taste, like cilantro, you know what I mean? If you have not grown up with that, you're probably not going to like the taste. Smell it.
You can cut a little piece.
Yeah, eat some. It's a food herb. It's not everybody's favorite herb unless they've grown up with it. You know,
Anybody wants to try some?
kind of like papalo or cilantro. Like, if you're from that culture, then you think it's good. It's like when I first ate it, I thought, you know. Now I kind of like it, but
Tastes
took some getting
green.
used to. It tastes
You
green.
want to try?
Yeah.
Stephanie?
No, I'm good.
So this would be one of those herbal teas. I would put half this and half mint tea, so you get the pleasant mint taste and still get the, you know, good benefits of that, right?
I like it.
So,
Me too.
so that's the main thing. Herbs are so easy to grow that we recommend them for beginning gardeners who have never grown anything. This is how easy they are, okay?
So most of them like sun, huh? So
Most of them, well, all the soft-leafed herbs, okay, do prefer part of the day shade in Lake County. They like full sun in the countries where they have evolved. But in Lake County, when it's triple digits, they do like to have afternoon shade if they can, you know? So all these soft-leaf herbs I usually grow on the east side of the house where the sun moves away in the afternoon. So they get full sun for like, you know, 4, 5, 6 hours, and then they get a little shade. That's what they like.
do you keep them in pot? Or do you plant
I
them
grow
directly
those in
this?
half wine barrels. You could theoretically grow them in this size pots, but a pot that size in triple-digit temperatures, you can imagine how that's going to heat up. You're going to have to water that in a gallon pot 3 times a day in the summer if you want to keep it alive. So I recommend growing them. If you grow them in containers, choose the biggest container you have space for and can afford, is my recommendation.
And your herbs really need to be outside.
Well, if you want the beneficial ingredients, yes.
Yeah.
Because everything that's beneficial about these herbs develops under the sun. Because the beneficial ingredients of these herbs are really natural pesticides that the plant produces to keep itself from getting eaten by pest insects. That's why herbs are so easy to grow. They produce their own pesticides. So the minty flavor of the mint is really a pesticide that the plant makes so bugs don't eat it. It's the same with, the lavender flavor, that strong lavender flavor, that strong rosemary flavor, that strong sage flavor. The hotter it gets, the more of those aromatic oils the plants produce. The more sun they have, the more they produce. Some of these substances are not just to protect the plant from getting eaten. Some of these are also to protect the plant from sunburn. Like in the case of the Mediterranean herbs, the more sun the herb gets, the more volatile oils it produces, which also protect it from sunburn, because it fortifies the structure of the plant. So the benefits we like about these plants are also benefits to the plant. That's why the plant is developing it for its own benefit. And anything that keeps a plant from getting eaten by a bug is medicinal. And it has usually some medicinal effect for us, So what keeps the rosemary from getting eaten by a bug is beneficial for us.
So that would be like antiviral,
Rosemary has some antibacterial, antiviral properties. It also increases blood flow in your head. It's used as in hair growth formulas by some people. It's used for memory issues. Anything that increases blood flow to your head will be good for your memory, right? So rosemary has a lot of benefits. Basically, all these essential oils that we like about those plants are really medicinal properties of the plants, and they are at the same time natural pesticides that the plant makes to protect itself.
So we can grow them in wood and ceramic. What about galvanized tubs or the?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, anything, you have to keep the container from heating up somehow. The smaller the container is, I would never, I don't grow things in black plastic tubs that are exposed to the sun, mostly because I'm in such a hot spot. It cooks the roots of the thing once we have triple digits, If it was a big black plastic container, then the roots can retreat in the middle of the pot where it's not as hot as on the outside. But if you have a gallon black plastic pots, the roots have nowhere to go when it's really hot. They literally get cooked in there. You could do something as simple as put an overpot over it. You could do something as simple as wrap a white t-shirt around the pot, which one of my neighbors has done that with all her plastic containers. She wrapped old t-shirts around it. Of course, once you water them a few times and it spills over, this starts looking pretty awful. It's not going to be decorative. So if you want a decorative garden, you're going to have to invest in a nice pot. If you don't care about decorative, hey, wrap an old white sheet around it. It'll work, So growing these things is not hard, as long as you keep in mind the maintenance that some of them need. Like the basils, if they are not maintained, if I would do nothing with this plant, this would be flowering and going to seed in about 2 weeks, and that would be the end of the plant. Yet I can keep this going till November if I keep snipping out the flowers and get huge amounts of material out of it, right? So, and that's the case with a lot of these plants, that they need a little bit of maintenance. Most of them not as much as basil. Now the Mediterranean plants, such as rosemary or the sages and the lavenders, you can do without maintenance. You can do nothing with a lavender or a rosemary and it will survive, end times basically. I had a rosemary that survived for 15 years without watering, pruning, fertilizing or anything.
Wow.
It was that big. eventually it dried up. Just it couldn't resource enough water anymore, you know. But so there is some, and I have on the list of plants that I have in the back where it says popular herbs for tea. I have abbreviations for drought tolerant, grows large, high maintenance, low maintenance, pollinator plant, beneficial insects, etc., etc. So you can get a little bit of an idea. Because a lot of these plants are also good for beneficial insects or attract pollinators. You know, the lavenders, the rosemaries, when they're blooming, are great pollinator plants. So there's many reasons to grow those, not just for tea, obviously. Another thing I want to mention is, which took a long time for me to realize, there is some herbs that are actually much better with savory taste than as a tea. Some herbs you think don't taste good as a tea, but you realize if you throw them in a soup, they taste great. You know, like such as the Chiso may not be a great tea herb, but it's a great soup herb. So a great way to do it is if you don't want to cook a whole soup, you can cheat. And I brought that to remind myself, you know what, that is a bouillon cube. Yeah. I usually don't make soup with those, but in a pinch, if I want a cup of hot soup in a pinch, then I use one of those and I add some fresh herbs from my garden, and then I actually have a real herbal soup.
Yes,
So this is a good way to
do that. I do that the chicken bouillon.
Yeah.
I put it in like if I want noodles, I'll have extra.
So if you put some herbs in it, you can make that actually into a healthy meal, or at least healthier than without, right? So tea can be also hot soup. Hot soup is really nothing but an infusion of herbs and broth. It's still an infusion. It's a form of tea, right? So it's just one way to consume herbs that may not taste good as a, you know, beverage per se. You can put it in a soup.
So those black pots, we could paint them white.
You can paint them white. Yeah, that's one way to get around that, you know. So when you have an herb like, let's say, a big lavender, or let's say you have an herb that got really big towards the end of the season, like you managed to clip the things all season long, and then you end up with a huge herb like that. And now it's October and you can see it really wants to get a flower now. This is going to be your last harvest, but you have a lot of material, more than you can consume in a few days. So you can dry an herb, right? And there's many ways to dry herbs, but a lot of ways are not very good. That's why I want to talk a little bit about it. A dried herb, you want a dried herb. This is dried peppermint. See what that looks like? It's nice and dark green still. You don't want a dried herb to look like something that has dried out in the sun through neglect.
Yeah, how
Because-
do you keep them green?
Well, that's what I'm going to tell you right now. That's exactly what we're talking about. If you just leave it out in the sun and let it dry, you're losing all the beneficial properties. Okay? So then there's no point in even using it. In order to keep all the beneficial properties, herbs have to dry without light. They have to dry in the dark because it's the sun that degrades them when they're drying. So how do you keep something drying in the dark? In the olden days, we used to just hang things up in the attic. It was hot there, ventilated and dark, and you could hang bunches of herbs in the attic. Well, now I don't have an attic where I live. So what I do is, you could make a little bundle of like,
Would a
few
dehydrator work?
yes, I have a dehydrator, but you know, I have way more herbs than I can fit in my dehydrator. So I use the dehydrator, but I always use other ways because the dehydrator is only so big. So let's say you have a bundle of peppermint or verbena sprigs, just because it's sitting right there. I would take like 3 or 4 of those sprigs, you know, like the whole sprig at the end of the season, and then tie them up together with some twine. Tie them in a little bundle with some twine. Leave a long twine. And then I use a brown paper bag. I forgot to bring that. Do you know those brown lunch bags? Those brown paper lunch bags? I make a hole in the bottom of the lunch bag. I put it over my bundle of herbs. That way the herbs are in the dark. And then I hang it from the fan, from the ceiling fan. So that way it's in the dark in a brown paper bag. It has lots of ventilation from the ceiling fan. And it'll dry in a few days in the dark. And it'll come out looking like that. And then when it's dry, you strip it off the stalk. And when it's really dry, a good way to powder it, an easy way to powder it is, I didn't powder it yet because I wanted to show how easy it is to do it. Once you stripped it from the stalk and you put it in you can either put it in a paper bag would have been better. Or you can put it in a Ziploc bag, and then all you have to do is crunch it and you can turn it into powder. Now in the Ziploc bag it doesn't work because I'm locking air in there, but if you put it in a dry paper bag, a dry herb, and you crunch the paper bag, then you have your powder. Or you can put it in a coffee grinder, but you haven't had coffee in.
Right.
I have an herb coffee grinder that I use over
We
here.
use it for nuts.
Exactly. And then you can crunch it, but you don't need to make powder for it. I would use like a handful of those, you know, for a little jar of tea in the winter. Then when you store those dried herbs, again, you want to store them away from the light, especially sun or bright light. That's what degrades them more than anything. And room temperature, the cooler the better, obviously. But they would be okay at 70 degrees for like a year, as long as they're out of the light, right? If you
Or
want them
maybe
to
in
last,
those amber jars too.
yes, and I
Would that
brought
help?
one of those to show you. One more thing I've done. These are jars I keep them in to keep light out. And then a lot of the time I have them in a cabinet on top of that, so to make sure they're in the dark. But if I can't put them in a cabinet, I keep them in a dark jar like that. This is what keeps it fresh. I wanted to show you that. This is not an herb dryer, but I have an herb dryer at home that works on the same principle. It's much bigger. It's that wide. That was sold for growing marijuana, I'm sure. But I use it for my herbs. And it's the same principle. It's much bigger than that, but basically it's something you can hang from the ceiling next to a fan. And you put your herbal material in there, and it dries within a week. It's crispy dry, and I hang it in a dark corner of the house next to a fan. Now the one I have at home is about 3 times as wide as that, so you can put a lot of herbal material in there, and that's another good way to dry it. Then just don't forget it in there. You know, you don't want to leave it in there for 3 months. As soon as it's dry, put it in a dark, you know, glass jar or somewhere and store it as cool as you can. And how long do they store? Well, you know, I have herbs at home that have been sitting in a glass jar, forgotten in my storage room for 3 years, and they still look perfectly fine. Now, I would not count on having them contain all the beneficial properties at this point, you know what I mean? At this point, they're still okay tasting and you can still use them, but if you want the medicinal herb to be at its full potency, I wouldn't store it for longer than a year maximum. After that, they're going to lose their constituents. They can still be used and they may still taste fine, and they're still better than soda for you, but you know, don't count on miraculous benefits anymore at that point.
So your herbs and spices, you should be replacing.
Spices, same thing, yeah.
Yeah, replace them every year.
Yeah, exactly. So that I just wanted to go over some, if you're interested, over some individual herbs, or if you have any questions, go over the herbs that I brought. This is common sage. It's a dark colored variety, but it's the same species as the common garden sage. Sage is a plant that has been used in deodorants in Europe a lot. It keeps you from excessive sweating. That's one of the benefits it has. So it's been put in deodorants. But it's a culinary herb, you know. It has a strengthening, invigorating effect on the system. So when you're worried about getting a cold or flu or anything like that, this would be a good thing to drink on a regular basis preventatively. That holy basil, right, is a wonderful Ayurvedic herb that is used for many different things in Ayurveda, but I think it has just a wonderful taste that's distinctly different from the normal basil. And I fell in love with the taste of it. That's really the main reason I'm growing it. Stevia, as I already said, is a great sweetener. So you throw a little bit of stevia in with all the other herbs, and you just throw it in with the brewing. You know, so you have your sweet tea. This is lemongrass that I've only started growing in the last couple of years because I love Thai food. But I found it also makes a great tasting summer tea. So it's not just good in tom kha kai soup, it's also good for tea. And it
Love
grows
tom
so
kha.
easily. Yeah, it grows so easily in the summer. I mean, I have a huge barrel full of that. Lemon balm is one of the old traditional European herbals. It looks very tender, but it's in Europe an invasive perennial, super invasive, where it rains a lot. Now you don't have to worry too much about it here. Like it barely survives the summer without excessive watering. So, and it doesn't smell very much right now because it's been in the shade. But once it has enough sun, it smells heavenly. But again, the taste is not as great as the smell. So making tea out of it for me was a disappointing experience when I first tried that. So the way I actually use it instead of tea, which is boring, unless you spice it up with something else, I just throw it in the salad. That way I get all the benefit and, you know, I'm not disappointed not having the tea taste the way I expected.
That makes
Here we have a bunch of mints.
mine with ginger.
So this is a fantastic smelling mint. Again, hasn't been in the sun long enough to develop the full flavor, but it's strawberry mint. And when it's in the sun, it really has a very strong strawberry smell. So if you haven't smelled that,
My goodness.
yeah, it's a wonderful smelling. And this is an apple mint. Also doesn't smell like apple at this point, but will eventually. Yeah. So this plant, on top of the essential oils, which are not so strong, grew a lot of hairs to protect itself from insects. It's one of the ways, you know, that plants protect themselves getting eaten. Because most insects don't like the really hairy plants. Here we have more mints. As you can see, there's, you know, innumerable mints out there. They're all just really 2 or 3 species, but different cultivars of the same species to get a slightly different flavor. And so they all have the same benefits, but they have different flavors. This is an orange mint.
It's really strong.
Yeah, it's pretty strong. You can see it has a little bit different growth habit than the peppermint. This is actually a chocolate mint, but it has not developed the chocolate taste yet either because it hasn't had enough sun. So again, most of these plants develop their full flavor, you know, with with increasing sun exposure. But they're already good now, you know. They're already good now. Here we have another mint. Yerba Buena. I believe it was somewhat local, and probably not local to Lake County, but local to California.
It's like a native plant. Huh?
Yeah, it's a native plant and it's kind of minty too.
I think my mom used to talk about
Yeah.
it.
So Yerba Buena, the Spanish called it good herb because it was obviously good for you. Right? Yeah, so this is what I brought. I also propagated
Oh, you can
some
smell
for
it.
you to take home. I have thymes here, spearmint. This is one that I forgot to mention, calendula, because it's kind of on its way out now. It likes the cool, moist season once it gets as hot as now. It's very hard to keep it alive. But I like to grow it because I use it for salve making. And I brought you some flowers just so you know what it looks like, if I can find them. What is it? I'm sure you've all seen it. It has a very characteristic smell. If you smell it, it has a very characteristic smell. Mild, but very characteristic.
What is that?
Calendula.
I think I have this.
That's
growing where
it's a really one of the best medicinal herbs for skin issues. And I make salve out of it, but you can also make tea out of it, of course. Now it's kind of on its way out because it's too hot.
Too hot.
It is blooming, and it's a great pollinator plant to have all winter long. This blooms all winter long in my garden practically, you know. So it's a
Beautiful flower too.
good flowering thing to have that is during the season when not much other things flower. But in the summer it doesn't like the heat. And what you would use of that is just the flower petals for the tea. Now, some people who have ragwort allergies are allergic to the inside of it. So to be on the
use the
safe
petals.
side, just use the petals. I'm not, but some people are allergic to the inside, so just use the petals. And so when I infuse that in oil, it's an herbal oil, but I dry them before I infuse
Yes.
them. So when you make a tea out of it, you can infuse it in water. You don't have to dry it, obviously. It's a very mild tea, but calendula is kind of a soothing herb. It soothes skin irritations, and it also soothes you from the inside. So that's, for a soothing tea, a good thing to add. Like I said, in the summer, right now, not so much. I only have one in there and I forgot to label it, so it needs a shady spot to survive for much longer here. Yeah, otherwise feel free to take those.
Keep inside until planted like in the winter.
No, I would. It will not survive that long. A plant from
Even
the plant,
inside?
it will just grow lengthy, and then fall over.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I would put it in a shady spot in the garden. It will make a flower and seed, and then you can sow the seed in fall, and it'll be growing all winter. You know, or if somebody wants seed of it, I have a million seeds at home. You know, so it's something to grow in fall that will then bloom through the cool season. I just wanted to show you what the plant looks like as opposed to the flower. This is the seedling, you know, and I can probably keep it alive through June, and that's gonna be, you know, pretty much the end of it. But I have lots of seeds, so that's something I start again, you know, for the cool season then. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, take some herbs home to get your tea garden started. Okay. Let's see, make sure we got into all the props. You can do no wrong with herbs. Oh, one more thing.
Oh.
I forgot to mention. Herbal teas are not just for drinking, and I put 2 recipes for you on the back.
Yeah.
You can soak in it as a bath or make it just a foot soak. It's a great way to use herbal tea that you necessarily may not want to drink. Something that you hang your feet in there, especially the mints, peppermint. In the summer when you have hot feet, a nice little peppermint foot soak is really nice. And in Europe, in the olden days, it was really common to have sitz baths for women. All kinds of female complaints used to be treated with herbal sitz baths. And a sitz bath is basically a bathtub that's just big enough for you to sit in. So you would make a strong herbal tea and then sit in it. So the tea infuses into your insides. And that was a way to treat a lot of female complaints. Instead of drinking the tea, you would sit in your tea, and you could still drink it. So sitz bathtubs are not very common anymore. They're really hard to find. But I think my grandmother still had one. It's like it was a metal one, and it has a thing to lean on and 2 things to lean your arms on, and you basically sit in it, and you can read a book while you hang your butt in the herbal tea. Yeah. So
Self-care time, right?
Yeah, exactly, self-care time. And I think it's a great way to do it. And you could buy a little stock tank, you know, like they have at Rainbow Ag or one of those agricultural supply. That could function really well as a sitz bath. And if you don't want to go all about that, just use a dish tub and do a foot bath, which is almost as good. You know,
Could you just do
'Cause
it
the
in your normal bathtub?
oh, of course, but you don't need as much if you do it in a little plastic. You know what I mean? If I do it in my bathtub, I need to make much more tea because the bathtub is bigger. In order to get a good concentration, I need a lot more herbs. Whereas if I do it just in a little foot tub, I often actually sit at my desk with a foot tub underneath. So while I'm typing, I have a little herbal foot bath underneath my desk where my feet are in.
Hey, maximizing time. We need to, right?
Exactly. So these are ways to use herbal. There's, you know, and in the olden days, also herbal teas used to be used to wash wounds, calm down skin irritations. You used to literally dip a cloth in the herbal tea and wash yourself with it. So it's not just for drinking, you know. Especially herbs that have beneficial properties for the skin. It's a natural that you would use that in a bath.
Sure.
You know.
Absolutely.
Or as a compress. You can make some peppermint tea, let it cool down, put it as a compress on your forehead.
Fevers and stuff. Yeah.
I mean, the possibilities are endless. But I put 2 recipes on your handout just to give you an idea how to get started.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was a great class. Thank you for joining, and
Yeah, thanks for
hope
coming.
you learned a lot.
Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you.